Hey everybody. So years ago, I'm at a friend's house in their garage and they're doing some woodworking. And they keep using this wooden folding ruler to take all their measurements. So I asked the question, why don't you use a tape measure? So they walked over, pulled out a tape measure, and they showed me something on it. Look at the end of the tape measure. See how it wiggles up and down? They said, as tape measures get older, they get loose and it makes them lose their precision. And when you're doing woodworking or building anything for that matter, it's very important that you have precise measurements. So from that point on, I had this understanding that tape measures were inherently flawed. Fast forward about 15 years, I'm sitting in a college design class and my professor asked the question, how many of you guys have ever noticed that the end of the tape measure is loose? I remember that conversation from years ago, so yeah, I knew that. He says it was designed that way. What? Like, why would you, what? You see, the end of the tape measure is precisely 1/16 of an inch thick. The amount of play that the tape measure has is 1/16 of an inch. This allows you to take two different types of measurements. You can accurately and precisely measure from pushing the tape measure up against something. You can also do it by hooking it over something. Because if you didn't have the movement in the end of the tape measure, you would always be off by the thickness of that end. You know, maybe you'd be able to push up against and take your measurement, but if you went over, you'd be short. Or the opposite, you'd be long, you know? So the creator had this design, which allowed it to have all this utility. And in my head, this good design was a major flaw that made me completely discount the accuracy of tape measures when I needed precise measurements. In our lives, I think we come into that a lot. There are a lot of things about me that I would consider flaws, and I'm sure in your lives there are things that you would consider flaws. What are the chances that we actually have this brilliant designer, this brilliant creator behind us, behind our bodies, our lives, our flaws, that maybe had an intent that we didn't realize behind it? Maybe that loose end of your tape measure, the tape measure of your life and your personality, is actually something to give you more of a purpose, more of a utility than you would ever realize. You know, there's a missionary named Amy Carmichael who hated her brown eyes. She hated them. But because of those brown eyes that she so often prayed that she would get rid of, she was able to save many, many girls from the shrine prostitution that they were in over in India because she blended in with the people of India. There are these things that we think are flaws that God has designed for. There's a verse in the Bible in Psalm 139, starting in verse 13, and it says, "For you, God, created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." There's a lot of things to pull out of that passage, but there's two things I'd like to focus on. One, in verse 16, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. God has a plan. God knows what's going on. The other thing, verse 13, you knit me together in my mother's womb. You created my inmost being. Not only does God have a plan for your life, God created you. He knit you together to form what he wants you to be. So let's focus on those flaws that we think. Let's really focus on, is there a way that maybe God could be using those for good? And even if we can't understand the answer, we have to trust, we can know that God's intent, God's design is better than what we can imagine.